May 17, 1945, Camp Concordia, Kansas. The dust tastes like failure. It coats my tongue, my teeth, the back of my throat as the truck rattles down another endless American road. Through the wooden slats, I watch farmland roll past, green and fat and obscene in its abundance. Everything here is too much, too big, too bright, too alive. If you're intrigued by untold Cebu stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Like this video if you want more perspectives from the other side of history. Drop a comment telling me what would you do in this situation. Your engagement keeps these forgotten voices alive. Now back to May 1945. My name is Hauptmann, Captain Klaus Reinhardt, formerly of the 352nd Infantry Division Wehrmacht. Captured 8th of June 1944, Normandy. Age 29. Status: Officer POW. Destination: United States of America. That's what the intake card said at the processing center in England, written in English I could barely read then. I thought I knew what humiliation felt like. I was wrong. When they first told us we were being shipped to America of all places, I felt a strange relief mixed with dread. Relief because it meant we wouldn't be going to Russia. Every German soldier knew what happened to prisoners in Soviet hands. We'd heard the stories, seen the evidence. Russia meant death, slow or fast, but always death. America meant survival, at least survival of the body. But my pride, that was something else entirely. I'd been an officer, not just any officer, a company commander. I'd led 180 men across France, through the hedgerows of Normandy, into that meat grinder the Americans called liberation. I'd made decisions that kept men alive, and decisions that got them killed. I'd written letters to mothers and widows. I'd studied tactics at the Kriegsschule in Dresden, learned the theories of von Clausewitz and von Moltke. I'd believed, God help me, I'd believed, in duty, in order, in the righteousness of what we were doing. Then came Omaha Beach, June the 6th, 1944. I was positioned at Widerstands Nest 62, a resistance point overlooking what the Americans called Bloody Omaha. For hours, we held them. The MG-42 machine guns, we called them Hitler's buzzsaw, chewed through wave after wave. The water turned red. Bodies floated like driftwood. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where we stop them. 2 days later, I was lying in a shell crater with shrapnel in my leg, surrounded by Americans who looked like children playing soldier, boys from Iowa and Texas and places I'd never heard of. Chewing gum and smoking cigarettes like this was some kind of sport. "Hände hoch!" one of them yelled, his German atrocious. "Hands up." I raised my hands. That was the end of Hauptmann Klaus Reinhardt, officer of the Wehrmacht. What came next was something I still don't have words for. The journey to America took 3 weeks. We sailed from Southampton on a Liberty ship called the SS John W. Brown, packed in the hold like livestock. 387 prisoners, all ranks mixed together. The Americans didn't seem to care about our hierarchy, our structure. An Oberleutnant slept next to a private. A Feldwebel shared rations with a clerk. It was chaos. It was humiliating, but it was also strangely equalizing. We landed in New York Harbor on July 4th, 1944, Independence Day. The Americans thought this was hilarious. As we disembarked under armed guard, we could hear music and fireworks from the city. The Statue of Liberty loomed over us, that woman with her torch and her tablet, welcoming the world's tired and poor. We weren't tired and poor. We were the enemy. From New York, they transported us by train across the country, through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri. 3 days and nights watching America slide past the windows, cities that had never been bombed, towns with their lights on at night, as if there was no war at all. Children playing in yards, women shopping on main streets, cars, so many cars, just driving around like gasoline was water. In Germany, by 1944, we were eating sawdust bread and potato peels. Our cities were rubble. Our people were starving. Our women and children were sleeping in subway tunnels to escape the British and American bombs. And here they had plenty. I hated them for it. The train finally stopped in Kansas. Kansas, a state I'd barely heard of in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Camp Concordia was one of dozens of POW camps scattered across America's heartland. They put us there because we couldn't escape even if we tried. Where would we go? It was 1,500 miles to either coast, and we looked like exactly what we were, German soldiers in a foreign land. Camp Concordia held about 4,000 prisoners at its peak. It was massive, 400 acres of barracks, mess halls, recreation areas, even a theater where we could put on plays. The Americans followed the Geneva Convention to the letter. We were fed 3 meals a day. Actual meals, with meat and vegetables and bread that wasn't half sawdust. We had beds, showers, medical care. It was better than what most German civilians had. That realization sat in my stomach like a stone. The guards were mostly older men, too old for combat duty, or young boys waiting for deployment. They watched us with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. We were the enemy, but we were also just men, defeated men, broken men. Some of the prisoners adapted quickly. They learned English, made friends with the guards, worked cheerfully in the camp gardens and workshops. These men, I thought of them as collaborators, though I never said it aloud, seemed almost grateful to be prisoners. I wasn't grateful. I was furious. Every morning we had roll call. Every morning I stood at attention in my threadbare uniform, maintaining what dignity I could. I refused to smile. I refused to make small talk with the guards. I was an officer of the Wehrmacht, and I would act like it, even in captivity. The other officers noticed. Some approved. Others thought I was a fool, clinging to a war we'd already lost. Klaus, my friend Otto Brenner, told me one evening in August, as we sat on our bunks in the officers' barracks, "The war is over for us. You need to accept that." Otto had been a lieutenant in my division. We'd survived Normandy together, been captured together, made this whole impossible journey together. He was a practical man, a farmer's son from Bavaria, who'd never wanted to be a soldier in the first place. "The war isn't over," I said, "not while the Reich still fights." "The Reich is dying, Klaus. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it." I didn't answer, because he was right, and I couldn't bear it. In September 1944, the Americans started the agricultural work program. The farms needed labor, all the young American men were off fighting in Europe and the Pacific, and we, prisoners, needed something to do. The Geneva Convention allowed prisoner labor as long as it wasn't military work, and we were paid for it. Paid! They were going to pay us. 80 cents a day in camp scrip that we could use at the canteen for cigarettes, candy, toiletries. It was absurd. In Germany, our people were dying, and here we were getting paid to pick corn for the enemy. But what choice did we have? Sit in the camp all day and go mad? I volunteered. Not because I wanted to help America, but because I needed to move, to work, to do something other than think about how completely we'd been defeated. That's how I ended up on Henry Morrison's farm. October 3rd, 1944. Morrison Farm, 12 miles outside Concordia. The truck dropped us off at dawn. 6 prisoners, 2 guards, and a list of farms that needed help with the harvest. The Morrison place was first on the route. I saw him before he saw us. A big man, late 50s maybe, standing by a red barn with his hands on his hips, watching the sun come up over his fields. He wore denim overalls and a straw hat and looked exactly like every propaganda image we'd ever seen of American farmers. Prosperous, confident, unbothered by the war happening 5,000 miles away. I hated him immediately. "Morning, Henry!" the guard called out, a corporal named Davis who seemed to know every farmer in the county. "Brought you some workers." Henry Morrison turned and looked at us. Really looked at us. His eyes moved from face to face, taking inventory. We stood there in our faded uniforms with the big PW letters painted on the backs, trying to maintain some dignity. "They speak English?" Morrison asked. Some of them do. This one here. Davis pointed at me. He's an officer. Speaks pretty good. Morrison's eyes locked onto mine. Blue eyes, sharp and measuring. I stared back, refusing to look away first. An officer, Morrison said. Well, we don't have officers and enlisted on a farm, just workers. That gonna be a problem? It was Davis who answered. Shouldn't be. Right, Captain. Every fiber of my being wanted to say something defiant. Something to remind them that I was still a Wehrmacht officer, that I hadn't surrendered my dignity along with my weapons. But I also knew the rules. Insubordination meant solitary confinement. Resistance meant punishment details. And I was so tired of being punished. No problem, I said, the English words stiff in my mouth. Good, Morrison nodded. Davis, you and Preston can wait in the truck. I'll send these boys back at sundown. We got corn to bring in. And just like that, we were alone with the enemy. The work was hard, backbreaking actually. We loaded corn into a wagon, hauled it to the barn, unloaded it, went back for more. Hour after hour under the October sun. My leg, the one that had taken shrapnel at Normandy, ached like fire. But I'd done worse. We all had. Morrison worked alongside us, which surprised me. In Germany, the landowner wouldn't work his own fields. That's what labourers were for, or in our case, what French and Polish forced labourers had been for. But here was this American farmer, this enemy, doing the same work we were doing. Around mid-morning, he called a break. Water's in the shade, he said, pointing to a tree where a large jug sat waiting. Help yourselves. We drank greedily. The water was cold and clean, pulled from a well that morning. In Europe, clean water was a luxury. Here, it was ordinary. I noticed Morrison watching me again. You understand more English than you let on, he said. It wasn't a question. I studied it, I admitted. Before the war, I thought I might study engineering in Munich. English was required. Engineering? Morrison nodded. Smart. That's smart. I didn't know how to respond to that. Was it? What good had being smart done me? I'd ended up here anyway, a prisoner picking corn for a man whose country had destroyed mine. What's your name? He asked. Reinhardt. Klaus Reinhardt. Klaus. He tried it out, the American pronunciation turning it into something not quite German. I'm Henry Morrison. This is my farm, 640 acres, been in my family since 1889. My father homesteaded it when this was still frontier. I nodded, unsure why he was telling me this. You know what I think, Klaus? Morrison continued. I think you're angry. I think you're angry about losing, angry about being here, angry about everything. I get that. War's a terrible thing. I was in the first one in France, Belleau Wood. Lost a lot of friends there, German machine guns. My throat tightened. Was this it? Was this where the resentment came out, where he made us pay for what our fathers had done to his friends? But Morrison just took a long drink of water and wiped his mouth. Point is, he said, that war ended. This one'll end too. And then what? Then we all got to figure out how to live with each other again. Might as well start now. He walked away before I could respond. We worked until sunset. By the time Morrison drove us back to the truck in his battered Ford pickup, my entire body was screaming, but we'd finished the field. The corn was in. The job was done. Same time tomorrow, Morrison told Davis. If they're willing, they'll be here, Davis said. In the truck, heading back to camp, one of the other prisoners, a young private named Dieter, leaned over. He's not what I expected, Dieter said quietly in German. No, I agreed. None of this was what I'd expected. The next morning we returned, and the next, and the next. For 3 weeks we worked the Morrison farm, corn, then soybeans, then preparing equipment for winter. Morrison was a patient teacher, showing us how American farming worked. The machinery they had, tractors, combines, tools that did the work of 10 men. It was staggering. In Germany, we still used horse-drawn plows in many places. Technology, Morrison explained one day, patting his John Deere tractor like it was a pet. That's the secret. Work smarter, not harder. I thought about our panzer divisions, our Messerschmitt fighters, our U-boats, all that technology that was supposed to win us the war, and we'd still lost. Morrison talked while we worked. He told us about his farm, his family, his life. His son was in the Navy, somewhere in the Pacific. He didn't know exactly where. The letters were censored. His daughter had moved to Chicago to work in a factory making airplane parts. His wife had died 3 years earlier, cancer. "It's lonely out here now," he admitted one day. "Used to be this place was full of life. Now it's just me and the hired man, and he's 70 years old. This war's taken everyone." I realized he wasn't just giving us work. We were giving him something too. Company, purpose, maybe even absolution. He could tell himself he was doing his part, turning enemies into something useful. But I still kept my distance. I worked hard, followed instructions, answered questions when asked, but I didn't smile. I didn't make jokes. I maintained the wall between us. I was still his prisoner. He was still my enemy. Then came October 27th, 1944, the day everything changed. We'd been working since dawn, fixing a fence line that had been damaged in a storm. It was cold, Kansas cold, which cuts different than German cold, sharp and dry. Around noon, Morrison stood up and stretched his back. "That's enough for now," he said. "Come on up to the house. Lunch is ready." We exchanged glances. Usually we ate in the barn or under a tree, sandwiches and apples that Morrison brought out to us. But he was already walking toward the farmhouse, expecting us to follow. The house was white-clapboard, 2 stories, with a wide porch. Very American, very enemy. My boots were caked with mud and manure. I felt like I was walking into a trap. Morrison held the door open. "Well, come on. Food's getting cold." We filed inside. The kitchen was warm and bright with yellow curtains on the windows and a large wooden table in the center. And on that table, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, butter, milk, apple pie. Apple pie. I hadn't seen food like this since before the war. Maybe not even then. "Sit down," Morrison said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. We stood there, frozen. I said, "Sit down." His voice was firmer now, not angry, but commanding. The voice of a man used to being obeyed. Slowly, carefully, we sat. I took a chair at the far end, as far from Morrison as I could get. The other prisoners followed my lead, arranging themselves in a defensive cluster. Morrison sat at the head of the table. He bowed his head. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for the hands that prepared it, for the land that provided it. We thank you for safety in dangerous times, for peace in troubled hearts. Amen." "Amen," the other prisoners murmured. I said nothing. Morrison looked up. He picked up a platter of chicken and held it out to me. "Help yourself, Klaus." I stared at the platter, at the golden-brown chicken, the skin crispy and glistening, at this American farmer, this enemy, offering me food at his table. My hands didn't move. "Klaus," Morrison said again, more gently, "it's okay. You're hungry. Eat." "I cannot," I heard myself say. "Can't or won't. I am a prisoner." "You're a man. Men eat. Take the damn chicken." Something in his tone, not quite anger, not quite pity, broke through. My hand reached out. I took a piece of chicken, placed it on the plate in front of me. The platter went around the table. Potatoes, beans, bread, each prisoner taking food in silence, as if we were committing some kind of betrayal. And then Morrison did something I'll never forget. He looked directly at me and said, "My son's your age, somewhere out there on a ship doing his duty. I hope, I pray, that if he's ever hungry, if he's ever scared, if he's ever in trouble, some decent person will feed him, will treat him like a human being. That's all I'm doing here, treating you like what you are, a human being." My throat closed. The chicken tasted like ashes, because I understood then what he was doing. This wasn't kindness, this wasn't charity, this was humiliation. He was showing me that everything I'd believed about superiority, about strength, about who deserved respect and who didn't, was a lie. He was showing me that a simple farmer from Kansas had more humanity, more dignity, more honor than an officer of the Wehrmacht. And the worst part, he was right. I sat at that table eating his food in his house and felt my entire worldview crack open like an egg. The other prisoners ate with obvious relief, even joy. They laughed. They thanked him. One of them, Dieter, even asked for seconds. But I couldn't. I ate because my body needed food, but every bite was torture. When the meal was over, Morrison stood up. "You boys did good work today. I appreciate it. Same time tomorrow?" We nodded. As we walked back to the truck, Dieter was practically skipping. "Did you taste that pie? Did you taste it? I haven't had pie since I don't even remember." "It was good." Another prisoner agreed. "Morrison is a good man." I said nothing. That night in my bunk I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Otto rolled over and looked at me. "You okay?" "He fed us at his table," I said. I heard it was incredible. He treated us like equals. "And that's bad?" "I'm an officer, Otto. I commanded men. I made decisions. I studied tactics and strategy. I was somebody." "Klaus. And now I'm eating at the table of a farmer, a man who didn't even finish school, who's never left Kansas, who knows nothing of the world. And he's treating me like we're the same." Otto was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe you are," he finally said. I wanted to argue. I wanted to rage. I wanted to explain that there was a difference, that rank and education and breeding meant something, that I wasn't just another prisoner, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down in a place I didn't want to look, I knew. I knew that Otto was right. I knew that Morrison was right. I knew that everything I'd built my identity on, the uniforms, the rank, the ideology, the sense of superiority, was dust. And that knowledge was more terrifying than any battle I'd ever fought. The next day, Morrison made us eat lunch at his table again. And the day after that, and the day after that, it became routine: work, lunch, work, supper sometimes if we stayed late. Every meal, Morrison set the table for all of us. Every meal, he said grace. Every meal, he treated us like we belonged there. And every meal I died a little inside, not from cruelty, from kindness. That was the unbearable part. If he'd been cruel, if he'd worked us like slaves and thrown scraps to us in the barn, I could have maintained my anger. I could have kept my identity intact. I could have been the proud German officer suffering under American barbarism. But he gave me no such luxury. By November, something was changing, not just in me, in all of us. The way we worked together became smoother. The conversations became easier. One evening, Morrison showed us photographs of his family, his son in his Navy uniform, his daughter at her high school graduation, his wife in her wedding dress. "That was 1908, he said, touching the photograph gently. 36 years ago. Best decision I ever made." Dieter asked, in halting English, if Morrison had photographs from the Great War. Morrison's face changed. "I do. But I don't look at them much. Too many ghosts." "I understand," I said before I could stop myself. "I have ghosts too." Our eyes met. In that moment we weren't captor and captive, American and German, victor and vanquished. We were just two soldiers carrying the same weight. "Yeah," Morrison said quietly. "I expect you do." December 1944. The work slowed with winter. We still went to the Morrison farm. Maintenance work, repairing equipment, preparing for spring. But the urgency was gone. The harvest was in. The war in Europe was entering its final phase, though we didn't know that yet. We only knew what we heard on the radio in camp, what we read in the carefully censored newspapers. Germany was losing. Everyone could see it now. In December, the Battle of the Bulge began, Germany's last major offensive. For a few desperate days, we prisoners dared to hope. Maybe the tide would turn, maybe our armies would break through, maybe somehow we would win after all. But the hope was brief. The Americans pushed back. The offensive failed. Our last gamble had failed. Otto stopped talking about going home to Bavaria. Dieter stopped asking when the war would end. And I stopped pretending I was still an officer of the Wehrmacht. I was just Klaus, a prisoner, a man. One afternoon in late December, Morrison and I were alone in the barn, organizing tools for spring planting. The others were working on the far side of the property. "Can I ask you something?" Morrison said. "Yes. Why'd you join the German army? Was it because you believed in what they were saying, the ideology?" It was the first time he'd asked directly about my politics, my beliefs, my reasons. I thought carefully before answering. "I joined because it was my duty," I said, "because every young man in Germany was joining, because the economy was terrible, there were no jobs, no future. The army gave me purpose, structure, brotherhood. I didn't think much about the ideology at first. It was just what everyone believed. And later I was in too deep to question it. And the parts I didn't agree with, I told myself they were exaggerations. Propaganda from the other side. I told myself we were defending Germany, protecting our people, preserving our way of life. And now?" I looked at him. "Now I think I was a fool." Morrison nodded slowly. "Most soldiers are in one way or another. We do terrible things because we're told to, because everyone else is doing them, because questioning feels more dangerous than obeying. I shot men in the Great War. German men, men like you. I followed orders. That's what soldiers do. Do you regret it?" "Every day. But regret doesn't bring them back." He paused. "The question is, what do you do with it? The regret, the guilt, the knowledge that you were part of something terrible." I had no answer. "You carry it," Morrison said. "You carry it, and you try to be better. That's all any of us can do." We worked in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence. Comfortable, understanding. Two men who'd been on opposite sides of the same terrible machine, trying to figure out how to be human again. Christmas came. In camp, the Americans allowed us to celebrate. They even provided materials for decorations, and someone organized a small concert. German prisoners sang Stille Nacht, Silent Night, while American guards stood watch, and some of them sang along in English. It was surreal. It was heartbreaking. It was beautiful. On December 27th, Morrison invited us to his house for supper. It was a feast. Turkey, stuffing, cranberries, pies, everything a traditional American Christmas meal should be. "I celebrated on the 25th with my neighbors," he explained. "But I wanted to do something for you boys too. Figure you could use some Christmas spirit." We ate together, all 7 of us, 6 prisoners and 1 farmer. We told stories. We laughed. Dieter taught Morrison a German Christmas song, and Morrison taught us Jingle Bells. For a few hours the war didn't exist. As we were leaving, Morrison pulled me aside. "Klaus, I want you to know something. When this is all over, when you go home, I hope you'll remember that not all Americans are your enemy, and I hope you'll build something good, something better than what came before." My voice was thick. "I will try. That's all any of us can do." He shook my hand, not like a guard and a prisoner, like equals. Like friends. I walked back to the truck in a daze. Everything I'd thought I knew about myself, about the world, about right and wrong, it was all different now. Changed, transformed by the simple act of being treated like a human being. January 1945. The new year brought news that Germany was crumbling. Soviet forces were pushing from the east, American and British forces from the west. Cities were falling, the Reich was dying. In camp, some prisoners celebrated quietly, others wept. A few, the true believers, the SS men, the fanatics, raged and plotted impossible escapes. But most of us just waited. What else could we do? I kept working at the Morrison farm. It had become my anchor, my routine, my new purpose. Every morning the truck would pick us up. Every day we'd work the land. Every meal we'd eat at Morrison's table, and slowly, imperceptibly, I was becoming someone new. One evening in late January, as we were finishing supper, Morrison mentioned that his neighbor, a man named Thompson, needed help moving some cattle. Would we be willing? Of course, I said without hesitation. Morrison smiled. You've changed, Klaus. When you first came here, you looked at me like I was the devil himself. I thought you were humiliating me, I admitted. By feeding you at my table? Yes. And now? I thought about it, really thought about it. Now I understand that you were teaching me. Teaching you what? That we're all just men. That the uniforms and the flags and the ideologies, they don't matter as much as we think they do. What matters is how we treat each other, how we see each other. Morrison nodded. Took me a war to learn that lesson too. Glad you learned it faster. I don't know if glad is the right word, I said. It cost me everything I thought I was. Maybe, Morrison said, but look what you gained. I looked around the table. At Dieter, laughing at something another prisoner said. At the warm kitchen, the good food, the sense of safety and belonging. At Morrison, this enemy who'd become something else, something better. Yes, I said. I see what I gained. February 14th, 1945. The day I'd been dreading finally came. The officer in charge of the work program called me into his office. Reinhardt, we're reassigning you. Camp in Colorado needs officers who speak English to help with administration. You leave in 3 days. My heart sank. But the farm, Morrison's farm, you'll be replaced. We've got plenty of men who can do farm work. Sir, I request to stay here, please. The officer looked surprised. You're requesting to stay in a work program? Most officers try to get out of manual labor. Morrison's farm is... I'm needed there. You're needed in Colorado. That's final. There was no arguing with military orders, even as a prisoner. That afternoon, I told Morrison. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, well, I'm glad we had the time we did. I am too. You're going to be okay, Klaus. You're going to go home someday, and you're going to build a good life. I know you will. How can you know that? Because I've watched you change. I've watched you learn. That's the hardest thing a man can do. Learn that he was wrong and choose to be better. You've done that. My eyes burned. I couldn't speak. Morrison stuck out his hand. It's been an honor, Captain Reinhardt. I shook his hand, barely holding myself together. The honor was mine, Mr. Morrison. My last day at the farm was February 16th, 1945. We worked like always, repairing a fence, organizing the tool shed, preparing for spring. But everything felt different. Final. At lunch, Morrison served us one last meal, pot roast and potatoes, apple pie for dessert. Before we ate, he said grace. Lord, we thank you for bringing these men into my life, for teaching me that enemies can become friends, that walls can become bridges. I pray for their safety, for their futures, for their families back home. I pray that when this war ends, we'll all find peace. Amen. Amen, we all said, even me. After the meal, Morrison walked me out to the truck. The other prisoners hung back, giving us space. One more thing, Morrison said. He handed me a small wrapped package. Don't open it until you're on the train. What is it? Just a little something. To remember. The truck engine started. Time to go. Goodbye, Henry, I said, using his first name for the first time. Goodbye, Klaus. Go build something good. I climbed into the truck. As we drove away, I watched the farm disappear behind us. The red barn, the white house, the fields that had taught me so much. I watched until I couldn't see it anymore. On the train to Colorado, I opened Morrison's package. Inside was a photograph. Morrison and me standing in front of his barn. Someone must have taken it, probably Dieter, during one of our lunch breaks. In the photo, we're both smiling. Two men, former enemies, sharing a moment of genuine friendship. And underneath the photograph, a note in Morrison's careful handwriting: "Klaus, remember that we are all more than the worst thing we've done. Remember that change is possible. Remember that you are welcome at my table. Always." Henry Morrison, January 1945. I sat on that train, holding that photograph and that note, and I cried. Not from sadness, not from regret, from gratitude. Because Henry Morrison had given me something more valuable than food or shelter or even kindness. He'd given me back my humanity, and that was a gift I would carry for the rest of my life. But my story wasn't over. Not yet. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the final months of the war would bring revelations that would shake us to our core. And the question I'd have to answer was simple and terrible, now that I knew I was capable of being human again. What would I do about the monster I'd been? February 18th, 1945. Camp Carson, Colorado. The mountains are different here. Sharper, colder. They cut the horizon like broken teeth, and I can't stop staring at them through the barbed wire. In Kansas, the land was flat and forgiving. Here, everything feels like judgment. I've been at Camp Carson for 2 weeks, working as a translator in the administrative office. It's cleaner work than farming, no dirt under my fingernails, no sweat soaking through my shirt by noon. I sit at a desk and convert German documents into English, process transfer orders, help interview new prisoners arriving from the European theater. The war is ending. Everyone knows it now. We can feel it in the way the guards talk. In the newspapers, they don't bother hiding anymore. In the faces of the new prisoners who arrive with stories of total collapse. Berlin is surrounded. The Russians are coming from the east, like an avalanche. The Americans and British from the west. Germany is being crushed between two unstoppable forces. Every day I translate documents. Every day I see the evidence of our defeat written in official language, stamped and filed and archived. And every night I dream of Morrison's kitchen table. March 15th, 1945. A new batch of prisoners arrived today, 70 men from the Western Front, captured near the Rhine. They looked like ghosts. Hollow-eyed, skeletal, traumatized. The youngest couldn't have been more than 16. 16. I processed their intake forms, asked the standard questions in German, filled out the paperwork. One of them, a boy named Peter Hoffman from Hamburg, kept crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down his cheeks while he answered my questions. "How old are you?" I asked, though I already knew from his documents. 16, sir. I was called up in January. Hitler Youth to Wehrmacht in 3 weeks. What unit? 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. What's left of it? The Hitlerjugend Division. Child soldiers, essentially. Boys who'd been fed Nazi ideology since they were old enough to walk, who'd been trained to die for the Führer, who knew nothing else. Where were you captured? Near Remagen. After the Americans took the bridge, everything was chaos. Everyone was running. I just wanted to go home. His voice broke on that last word. Home. I finished the paperwork in silence. What could I say to him? That it would be okay, that he'd survive this, that going home to a destroyed Germany was something to look forward to. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at nothing. I thought about myself at 16. I'd been in school, studying, dreaming about university. The Nazi Party had just come to power, but the war was still 6 years away. I'd had a childhood, a real one. This boy had had nothing but war, and I'd been part of the machine that did this to him. April 12th, 1945. President Roosevelt died today. The Americans were devastated. Even the guards, who'd always maintained professional distance, walked around in a daze. Roosevelt had led them through the Depression, through the war, through everything. And now, 3 weeks before Germany's surrender, he was gone. In the prisoner barracks, some men celebrated quietly. They thought this might change things, might give Germany a reprieve. "Truman is weak," one prisoner insisted. "The alliance will fracture. We might still survive." I didn't have the heart to tell him it didn't matter, that Germany was already dead, we just hadn't buried the corpse yet. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to my family, I'd written to them regularly, though I never knew if they received my letters. Germany's postal system was in ruins. No, I wrote to Henry Morrison. "Dear Henry, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm now in Colorado, working as a translator. The work is easier than farming, but I miss the land. I miss the rhythm of physical labor. I miss your kitchen table. President Roosevelt died today. The Americans here are grieving." It made me think about leadership, about the men we follow and why we follow them. You told me once that we're all more than the worst thing we've done. I'm trying to believe that. Some days are harder than others. Thank you for everything you taught me. I carry it with me. Respectfully, Klaus Reinhardt. I didn't know if he'd ever receive it. I didn't know if I'd ever hear from him. But writing it made me feel less alone. April 30th, 1945. The news came through official channels at 600 hours. Adolf Hitler was dead. Suicide in his bunker in Berlin as Soviet forces closed in. The Führer was dead. For a moment, just a moment, the camp was completely silent. Thousands of German prisoners, all processing the same impossible information. Then, chaos. Some men wept, some cheered, some sat in stunned silence. The SS men and true believers looked like their world had ended, which I suppose it had. Others celebrated openly, finally free to express what they'd felt all along. I felt nothing, no grief, no relief. Just a hollow emptiness where my ideology used to be. I thought about all the speeches I'd heard, all the rallies I'd attended, all the times I'd raised my arm in salute. Heil Hitler. We'd said it thousands of times. Millions of times. It had been the beginning and end of every interaction, every order, every conversation. And now, the man behind those words was dead by his own hand, a coward hiding in a hole while his country burned. Everything we'd fought for, everything we'd killed for, everything we'd died for. It had all been for a lie. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. General Alfred Jodl signed the documents at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims, France. The European war was over. We'd lost, completely, totally, absolutely. In the camp, the mood was strange. There was relief. The dying was over, but there was also a terrible uncertainty. What now? Where would we go? What was left of Germany? And underneath everything, shame. We'd lost. We'd been defeated. Everything our propaganda had promised, victory, glory, the 1,000-year Reich, had crumbled into dust and ashes. That evening, the camp commander, Colonel Brennan, called an assembly. All 5,000 prisoners gathered in the main yard. "The war in Europe is over," Brennan announced in German, through a translator. "You are no longer soldiers. You are prisoners of war awaiting repatriation. Under the Geneva Convention, you will be treated humanely and return to Germany when conditions allow." He paused, looking out over the crowd of defeated men. "But before you go home, there's something you need to see." May 10th, 1945. They showed us the films. The American Army Signal Corps had been filming since April, when Allied forces began liberating concentration camps. Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau, dozens of others. Colonel Brennan gathered all the prisoners in the camp theater, a building we'd used for entertainment, for plays and concerts and films. But this wasn't entertainment. This was evidence. The lights went down. The projector started. And for the next 90 minutes, we watched hell. Bodies, piles of bodies, mountains of bodies, skeletal corpses stacked like cordwood, mass graves filled with thousands of dead, people so starved they didn't look human anymore, just skin stretched over bones, eyes huge in shrunken faces, staring at nothing, the gas chambers, the crematoria, the medical experiment labs, the torture rooms, children, so many children. The American narrator's voice was flat, clinical, describing what we were seeing, the locations, the estimated death tolls, the methods of killing, Zyklon B gas, starvation, typhus, executions, medical experiments, worked to death. Around me, prisoners were crying. Some were vomiting, some sat in frozen silence, unable to process what they were seeing. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because I'd known. Not the details, not the scale, but I'd known something was happening. We all had. The whispers about the camps, the rumors about what happened to the Jews, the Roma, the political prisoners, the undesirables. The trains we'd seen, packed with people heading east, the empty towns and villages, the silence when you asked questions. I'd told myself it was exaggeration, propaganda. I'd told myself that even if it was true, it wasn't my responsibility. I was just a soldier. I followed orders. I fought on the Western Front, far from any of that. But watching those films, I understood the truth. We were all responsible. Every German soldier who'd ever worn the uniform, every officer who'd followed orders, every citizen who'd looked away, who'd stayed silent, who'd told themselves it wasn't their problem. We'd all enabled this. The film showed American soldiers forcing German civilians from nearby towns to walk through the camps, to see what had been done in their name. The civilians looked just like the prisoners in this theater, shocked, horrified, denying. "We didn't know," they kept saying to the camera. "We didn't know." But they had known, just like I'd known. We just hadn't wanted to admit it. When the lights came back on, nobody moved. The theater was silent except for the sound of grown men weeping. Colonel Brennan stood at the front, his face hard. "This," he said in German, "is what you fought for. This is what your leaders did. This is the regime you served." His words hit like bullets. "I don't care if you were just following orders. I don't care if you didn't know the details. You were part of this, all of you. And you will carry this knowledge for the rest of your lives." He let that sink in. "When you go home to Germany, you will tell people what you saw here today. You will be witnesses. You will make sure this never happens again. That is your duty now. Not to the Wehrmacht, not to the Reich, to humanity." He walked out. We sat there in the darkness, alone with our guilt. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually people started leaving. Some stumbled out like they were drunk. Others had to be helped by friends. A few just sat, staring at the blank screen where the horrors had been. Otto found me. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. "Klaus," he said. "Klaus, we need to talk." I couldn't speak. "I knew," Otto said, "about the camps. I knew they existed. My brother worked as a guard at Sachsenhausen before he was transferred to the Eastern Front. He told me things. Not everything, but enough. And I didn't want to believe him. I told myself he was exaggerating, that it couldn't be that bad." His voice broke. "I knew, Klaus, and I did nothing. We all knew," I finally said. "Maybe not the details, but we knew enough. We chose not to look. What do we do now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when you discover that you've been part of the greatest evil in human history? When you realize that everything you fought for, everything you believed in, was built on genocide and horror? I thought about Henry Morrison, about his kindness, about him treating me like a human being when I didn't deserve it. Remember that we are all more than the worst thing we've done. Remember that change is possible. We carry it, I said, echoing Morrison's words. We carry this knowledge, this guilt, this responsibility, and we try to be better. That's all we can do. Is it enough? I don't know, but it's all we have. May 15th, 1945. The next few days were hell. The films had shattered something in the camp. Fights broke out between prisoners who'd been SS guards and those who hadn't. Some men attempted suicide. Others descended into denial, insisting the films were propaganda, that none of it was real. But most of us just walked around in a daze, trying to process what we'd learned. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bodies, those children, those skeletal faces staring at nothing. I kept thinking, what if I'd been stationed differently? What if I'd been sent east instead of west? Would I have been a guard at one of those camps? Would I have followed those orders too? I wanted to believe I wouldn't have, that I would have resisted, refused, done something, but I'd followed every other order without question. I'd shot at Americans and British soldiers who were fighting to stop this evil. I'd served the regime that did this. How could I claim I would have been different? May 20th, 1945, a letter arrived from Henry Morrison. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Morrison's neat handwriting on the front, my name and the camp address. He'd written back. I opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Klaus, thank you for your letter. I was glad to hear from you. I hope Colorado is treating you well, though I imagine it's quite different from Kansas. I was sorry to hear about President Roosevelt. He was a good man, flawed like all of us, but he led us through dark times. Now we have Truman, and we'll see what comes next. The war is over, Klaus. Germany has surrendered. I'm sure you've heard by now. I've been thinking a lot about what comes next, for you and for all the prisoners who'll be going home soon. I've also seen the news reports from the camps, the concentration camps. I won't lie to you, it's been hard to process. Hard to understand how human beings could do such things to each other. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with you and the other boys, sharing meals, talking about our lives. You were good men. You worked hard. You laughed and told stories and showed me photographs of your families. And yet you wore the uniform of a regime that did these terrible things. I've been wrestling with that, trying to understand how both things can be true at the same time. Here's what I've come to. People are complicated. Good people can be part of bad systems. They can follow orders they shouldn't follow. They can look away when they should look closer. They can convince themselves that their small part doesn't matter, or that they didn't know, or that it's not their responsibility. But here's what I also know. You can change. You already have changed. I watched it happen in my barn, at my table, in my fields. You learned to see me as a human being, not just an enemy. You learned that your rank and your uniform didn't make you better than anyone else. You learned humility. That's a start, but it's only a start. When you go home to Germany, you're going to face the consequences of what your country did. You're going to see the destruction, the death, the guilt. It's going to be hard, harder than anything you've faced so far. But I believe you can handle it. More than that, I believe you can help rebuild, not just buildings and roads, but something more important, a moral foundation, a Germany that remembers this horror and makes damn sure it never happens again. You asked me once how to carry regret and guilt. Here's my answer. You carry it by being better, by speaking truth, by standing up when you see wrong, by treating every person, every single person, as valuable and worthy of dignity. You do it by remembering that we're all capable of evil and choosing good anyway. That's the work of a lifetime, Klaus. But I think you're up to it. The war may be over, but your real battle is just beginning. You're always welcome at my table. Henry Morrison. I read the letter 3 times, then I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket, next to the photograph he'd given me. Morrison was right. The real battle was just beginning. Not against external enemies, against ourselves, against our capacity for evil, against our willingness to look away, to follow orders, to convince ourselves that we're not responsible. That was the battle I'd have to fight for the rest of my life. June 1st, 1945. The camp implemented new educational programs. American instructors came to teach us about democracy, about individual rights, about the rule of law. They called it re-education, which sounded patronizing at first, but they were right. We needed it. We'd been educated, indoctrinated in Nazi ideology for years. We'd been taught that some people were superior to others. That obedience was the highest virtue, that the individual didn't matter, only the state. We'd been taught wrong. Now we had to learn new ideas. Old ideas, really. Ideas that had existed long before Hitler. Ideas that would hopefully outlast him by centuries. I attended every class. I read every book they gave us. Democracy, civil rights, constitutional government, the Enlightenment philosophers, the American founding fathers. I was trying to rebuild my worldview from the ground up. Other prisoners resisted. They saw it as Victor's propaganda, as the Americans trying to brainwash us. They clung to their old beliefs, insisted that Germany had been right, that we'd just been defeated by superior numbers and resources. I pitied them. They were prisoners twice over, once behind barbed wire, once inside their own minds. July 4th, 1945, Independence Day, exactly 1 year since I'd arrived in America, a year that had changed everything. The camp allowed a small celebration, American flags, a band playing patriotic music, even fireworks in the evening. We prisoners were allowed to watch from our compound. As the fireworks burst over the Colorado mountains, I thought about freedom, real freedom. Not the twisted version the Nazis had sold us. Freedom through strength, through dominance, through making others less free. But the freedom these Americans celebrated, the freedom to speak, to dissent, to choose your own path, the freedom that came with responsibility, with respect for others' freedom too. I'd never been free before, I realized. Even before I was a prisoner of war, I'd been a prisoner of ideology, of propaganda, of my own arrogance and willful blindness. Maybe that's what Morrison had been trying to teach me all along. That true freedom meant being free to see clearly, to choose compassion over cruelty, to treat others as equals not because you're forced to, but because it's right. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. The war, all of it, was finally over. The Americans went wild with celebration. Even the guards, who'd maintained professionalism throughout, let loose a bit. There was dancing, singing, pure joy. We prisoners watched from a distance, unsure how to feel. Relief, certainly. The killing was done, but also a strange emptiness. What now? That evening, I sat with Otto and a few others talking about the future. They say we'll start shipping home in September, Otto said. Back to Germany, or what's left of it. Are you ready? I asked. No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready. We have to face it eventually. What will you do when you get home? Otto was quiet for a long time. My family had a farm in Bavaria. If it's still standing, if the land is still usable, I'll try to rebuild it. Grow food, feed people. That's something good, at least. That's very good, I said. What about you? I thought about Henry Morrison, about his fields, his barn, his kitchen table, about the simple dignity of working the land, of feeding people, of building instead of destroying. I studied engineering before the war, I said. I wanted to build things. Maybe I can do that again. Help rebuild Germany, design buildings, bridges, infrastructure, make something that lasts. That's a good plan. If anyone will hire a former Wehrmacht officer, you'll figure it out. You're smart. You've changed. That counts for something. I hoped he was right. September 1st, 1945. The first group of prisoners began the journey home. 500 men loaded onto trains heading east to ships that would take them across the Atlantic. I wasn't in that group. Officers were being held longer for additional processing and security screening. We'd be among the last to go home. I watched them leave. Men I'd lived with for months, some for over a year. We'd shared barracks, meals, stories, the terrible knowledge of what we'd been part of. Now they were going back to face it. Peter Hoffman was in that group. The 16-year-old boy from Hamburg. I found him before he left. Peter, I said, remember what we saw, the films, the camps. Remember and tell people. They won't want to hear it, he said. Tell them anyway. That's your duty now. He nodded, looking much older than 16. Herr Hauptmann, he said, using my old rank. Were we the bad guys? I wanted to soften it, to explain the complexity, the circumstances, the gradual slide into evil that no single person can stop. But he deserved the truth. Yes, I said. We were the bad guys. What do we do now? We do better. He boarded the train. I watched it disappear into the distance, carrying its cargo of guilty men back to a broken homeland. October 27th, 1945. 1 year, exactly 1 year, since the first day Henry Morrison made me eat at his table. I marked the anniversary by writing him another letter. Dear Henry, 1 year ago today, you invited me into your home and fed me at your table. I thought you were humiliating me. I thought you were showing me that I was worthless, that my rank and my training and my identity meant nothing. I was right, but not in the way I thought. You were showing me that those things, rank, uniforms, ideology, truly didn't matter, not because they were worthless, but because they were irrelevant to what actually mattered. How we treat each other, how we see each other, whether we recognize the humanity in every person, even our enemies, especially our enemies. I've seen things since I left your farm, terrible things, evidence of crimes I can barely comprehend. I've learned that the regime I served was evil beyond measure, that every day I wore that uniform I was complicit in genocide. That knowledge is my burden now. I'll carry it forever. But I'll also carry what you taught me, that people can change, that we're more than our worst moments, that there's always a choice to be better. You saved me, Henry. Not my body. The Americans did that when they captured me instead of killing me. You saved something more important. You saved my humanity. You showed me how to be a man again, instead of just a soldier, just a cog in a terrible machine. I'm going home soon. Back to Germany. Back to a country in ruins, devastated by the war we started. I don't know what I'll find there. I don't know if my family survived. I don't know if there's anything left to rebuild. But I know what I'll try to do. I'll try to be the man you saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. I'll try to treat others with dignity. I'll try to speak truth. I'll try to make sure this never happens again. I'll try to be worthy of sitting at your table. Thank you for everything. Thank you for your kindness, your patience, your willingness to see past the uniform to the man underneath. Thank you for teaching me that change is possible. I hope someday I can return to Kansas. I hope someday I can sit at your table again as a free man, as a friend, as someone who's earned the right to be there. Until then, I carry you with me. Your words, your example, your belief that we can be better than we were. With gratitude and respect, Klaus Reinhardt P.S. I still have the photograph. I look at it often. It reminds me of who I want to be. November 15th, 1945. My turn finally came. Orders arrived. I was to be repatriated with the next group of officers, departing in 3 days. I was going home. I should have been happy, excited, relieved. Instead, I was terrified. Germany wasn't the country I'd left. By all accounts, it was a wasteland. Cities destroyed, the economy collapsed, people starving, the country divided between occupying powers, and over everything, the suffocating weight of collective guilt. How do you go home to that? How do you rebuild not just buildings, but an entire moral framework? How do you look people in the eye, knowing what you were part of? Otto, who was being repatriated in the same group, found me packing my few possessions. Ready? He asked. No. You? No. But we don't get to choose. Otto, what if we can't do it? What if we can't rebuild? What if Germany is too broken? Then we fail trying. But at least we try. That's more than Hitler did. He just put a bullet in his head and left us to clean up his mess. He was right. Running away, giving up, surrendering to despair, that was the coward's way. The Hitler way. We had to do better. November 18th, 1945, the last day. The transport was scheduled for noon. We'd be taken by train to the East Coast, then by ship across the Atlantic, then... who knew? Germany was divided into occupation zones. We'd be processed by the Allies, maybe detained further, maybe released immediately. Everything was uncertain. That morning, one final letter arrived, from Henry Morrison. My hands shook as I opened it. Klaus, I got your letter. All of them, actually. I've read them many times. You asked if you can come back someday and sit at my table as a free man. Son, you've been a free man since the day you chose to change. Freedom isn't about where you are or what your legal status is. It's about who you choose to be. And you've chosen to be someone worth knowing. Yes, you were part of terrible things. Yes, you'll carry that guilt. You should. That guilt is what will keep you from ever making the same mistakes again. It's what will make you stand up when you see injustice. It's what will remind you that following orders is never an excuse. But don't let guilt destroy you. Let it shape you instead. I've thought a lot about why I invited you into my house that first day. It wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was because I saw something in you, a spark of humanity underneath all the anger and pride and conditioning. I saw a man who could still be reached, who could still learn, who could still change. I was right. You asked if you earned the right to sit at my table. Klaus, you don't have to earn basic human dignity. That's the whole point. Every person has worth, not because of what they've done or who they are, but because they're human. That's what the Nazis forgot. That's what you learned. So yes, you're always welcome at my table. Not because you earned it, but because you're human, and humans deserve dignity. But more than that, you're my friend, and friends are always welcome. Go home, Klaus. Face what you have to face. Do the hard work of rebuilding, not just buildings, but hearts and minds, and a moral foundation. Tell the truth about what happened. Don't let anyone forget. Don't let anyone deny. And know that an old farmer in Kansas believes in you. You're going to do great things, not because you're special, but because you've learned the most important lesson, that every person matters, that how we treat each other is what defines us, that change is always possible. Take care of yourself. Build something good. And if you ever make it back to Kansas, there'll be a place at my table and a handshake waiting for you. Your friend, Henry. I folded the letter and put it with the others, with the photograph, with all the pieces of the man I'd become. Then I picked up my bag and walked toward the train that would take me home. December 1st, 1945, Hamburg, Germany. The ship docked in Hamburg on a grey morning, or what was left of Hamburg. The city I remembered, the grand buildings, the busy port, the thriving streets, was gone. In its place was rubble, mountains of rubble, entire neighborhoods reduced to broken brick and twisted metal, people wandering like ghosts, dressed in rags, hollow-eyed with hunger. This was Germany now. This was home. We were processed quickly by British occupation forces. Questions about our service, our rank, our activities. Security screening to identify war criminals, SS officers, anyone who'd committed atrocities. I told the truth. About my service in Normandy, about being captured, about my time as a POW, about the films I'd seen, the camps, the knowledge of what had been done. You understand you may be called as a witness, the British officer said. War crimes trials, evidence gathering. I understand. You're free to go. Report to local occupation authorities for registration. Don't leave your assigned zone without permission. Just like that, I was free. Free to walk through the ruins of my country. Free to face what we'd done. Free to begin the impossible work of rebuilding. I made my way to my family's address in a suburb that no longer existed. The apartment building was gone, just a pile of rubble with a few walls still standing. No way to know if my family had been inside when it was bombed, or if they'd escaped, or where they might be now. I stood there for a long time, staring at the destruction. A woman approached, elderly, thin, wrapped in a threadbare coat. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked in German. "The Reinhardt family. They lived here before we bombed ourselves into hell?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "The Reinhardts left in 43 when the bombing got bad. Went to stay with relatives in the countryside. Near Lübeck, I think. Are they? I don't know, son. I don't know anything anymore. I don't know who's alive and who's dead. I don't know how we're going to survive the winter. I don't know anything." She walked away, muttering to herself. I stood in the ruins of my childhood home and felt the full weight of everything we'd lost. Not just buildings, not just lives. We'd lost our humanity, our honor, our future. And now we had to find it again. January 1946. I found work with a British reconstruction team. My engineering training, my English language skills, they made me useful. We cleared rubble, planned rebuilding projects, coordinated supply distribution. It was hard work, good work, work that built instead of destroyed. At night, I stayed in a dormitory with other workers, former soldiers, displaced persons, refugees. We were all broken in different ways, all trying to piece ourselves back together. I told them about America, about the POW camp, about working on Morrison's farm, about learning that enemies could become friends. Some believed me. Others thought I was naive, that I'd been brainwashed by American propaganda. "The Americans defeated us," one man said. "Of course they treated you well. They wanted to show how civilized they were. It was all for show." "No," I said, "it wasn't for show. Morrison didn't have to treat us like human beings. He chose to. That's different." "Why? Why would he choose that?" "Because he understood something we forgot, that we're all just people. That the uniforms and flags and ideologies are stories we tell ourselves, but underneath we're all the same." That's naive. Maybe, but it's also true. March 1946. I finally found my family. My mother and younger sister were alive, living in a displaced persons camp near Lübeck. My father had died in 1944, heart attack brought on by stress and malnutrition. We had a reunion that was equal parts joy and grief. Joy that we'd survived. Grief for everything we'd lost. My mother looked 20 years older. My sister, who'd been a teenager when I left, was now a hardened young woman who'd seen too much too young. "Klaus," my mother said, holding my face in her hands, "you're so thin. And your eyes. What did they do to you?" "They treated me well, Mutti. Better than I deserved." "Don't say that. You're my son. You always deserve." "Mutti, I need to tell you something about what we did, what Germany did. I don't want to hear it. You need to. We all need to. We can't pretend it didn't happen," I told her. About the films, the camps, the genocide, the full horror of what had been done in Germany's name. She wept. My sister turned away, unable to face it. "How could they?" my mother asked. "How could anyone?" "Because we let them," I said. "Because we followed orders. Because we looked away. Because we told ourselves it wasn't our responsibility. But you were just a soldier. You didn't—" "I wore the uniform, Mutti. I fought for the regime. I'm responsible." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, my sister spoke. "So what do we do now?" "We remember," I said. "We tell the truth. We make sure it never happens again. And we rebuild, not just Germany, but our humanity." Is that even possible? It has to be. May 1946. The Nuremberg trials began. Top Nazi leaders on trial for war crimes, crimes against peace, crimes against humanity. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was devastating. We watched, all of us, Germans trying to understand what had been done, trying to comprehend how we'd allowed this to happen. Some of my countrymen still denied it. Victor's justice, they said. Propaganda, exaggeration. But I'd seen the films. I knew the truth, and I spoke it whenever I could. In work crews, in bread lines, in dormitories, and displaced persons camps. I became one of the witnesses Colonel Brennan had talked about. Someone who'd seen the evidence and refused to deny it. It made me unpopular. Some people called me a traitor, a collaborator. They wanted to forget, to move on, to pretend it hadn't been so bad, but I couldn't let them forget. Wouldn't. This was my duty now, my penance, my life's work. June 1946. I received a package from America, from Henry Morrison. Inside, a letter and a small bag of seed. Klaus. I heard from friends in the International Red Cross that mail is getting through to Germany again. Thought I'd send you something practical. These are corn seeds, good Kansas stock, bred for resilience. They'll grow in poor soil, can handle drought, produce reliably. Seemed appropriate. I also wanted you to know I'm proud of you. I've been following the news from Germany, reading about the trials, the reconstruction, the reckoning with what happened. I know it's hard, harder than anything you faced in the war, but you're doing it. You're facing the truth. You're speaking out. You're building instead of destroying. That's what matters. Plant these seeds when spring comes. Watch them grow. Remember that from destruction, new life can emerge. Remember that we can always choose to plant something good. You're in my prayers. Henry. I held the bag of seeds and cried. Not from sadness, from hope, from the knowledge that even after everything, all the death, all the destruction, all the evil, there were still people like Henry Morrison in the world. People who believed in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility of growth from rubble. When spring came, I'd plant these seeds. I'd watch them grow. I'd tend them carefully, nurturing life where death had been. And maybe, slowly, that's how we'd rebuild Germany, one seed at a time, one choice at a time, one person at a time, choosing to be better than they were. August 1946. 2 years since I'd been captured. 2 years since my old life ended and this new one began. I was standing in what would become a new apartment building, one of hundreds being planned across Hamburg. My engineering team had designed it. We'd cleared the rubble from this site ourselves. Tomorrow we'd pour the first foundation. Something from nothing. Life from death. I thought about the man I'd been. Proud, arrogant, blind to the evil I was serving. I thought about the man I'd become, humbled, guilty, but trying, always trying, to be better. I thought about Henry Morrison's table and what I'd learned there, that we're all just human beings, that dignity is a birthright, not something earned. That change is possible, always possible, even when everything seems lost. That how we treat each other, especially our enemies, defines us more than any uniform or flag or ideology ever could. I pulled out the photograph Morrison had given me. 2 men, former enemies, standing together in front of a Kansas barn. Both smiling, both human. I would carry this photograph forever, not as a reminder of my captivity, but as proof that redemption is possible. That we can be more than the worst thing we've done, that enemies can become friends, that even in the darkest times there's hope. Tomorrow we'd start building, and the day after that, and every day after that for the rest of my life. Not just buildings, but a better world. One seed at a time, one brick at a time, one choice at a time. That was Henry Morrison's gift to me. Not just his kindness, but his belief that I could be better, that we all could be better, and I would spend the rest of my life proving him right. December 1950. 5 years after the war ended, I received a letter from an American immigration office. Someone had sponsored my visa application, a farmer from Kansas named Henry Morrison. You said you'd come back to my table, his accompanying letter read. Well, the table's still here, and so am I. Come visit when you can. Bring those stories about rebuilding Germany. I want to hear them. I applied for the visa. 6 months later, I boarded a plane to America. Not as a prisoner this time, but as a free man, as a friend. When I arrived at Morrison's farm, he was standing in the same place he'd been that first day in October 1944. By the red barn, hands on his hips, watching the sun rise over his fields. But this time, when he saw me, he smiled. He walked over and stuck out his hand. I shook it. Welcome home, Klaus, he said. And standing there in Kansas, 5,000 miles from where I'd been born, I realized he was right. This was home, not because of the place, but because of what it represented: forgiveness, redemption, the possibility of becoming someone new. We walked to the house together. The kitchen table was set for 2. I sat down, not as a prisoner this time, not as someone being taught a lesson, but as an equal, as a friend, as a man who'd learned finally what it meant to be human, Still like apple pie? Morrison asked, grinning. Always, I said, and for the first time in 6 years, I smiled without guilt, without shame, without the weight of who I'd been crushing down on who I was trying to become, because Henry Morrison had taught me the most important lesson. We're all more than the worst thing we've done, and we can always, always choose to be better. Thank you for witnessing Klaus's journey from pride to humiliation to redemption. If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more untold perspectives from history. Like this video if you believe in the power of second chances. And comment below. What would you do if you discovered you'd been on the wrong side of history? How do we rebuild after we've been part of something terrible? Your thoughts matter. Share them below. Remember, we're all more than our worst moments. We can all choose to be better. See you in the next story. Author's note, this story is a work of narrative non-fiction based on historical facts about German POWs in America during World War II. While Klaus Reinhardt is a fictional character, his experiences reflect documented realities. Approximately 380,000 German prisoners were held in the United States. Many worked on American farms. Some developed genuine friendships with their captors, and all were shown footage of concentration camps as part of denazification efforts. The dates, locations, military units, and historical events are accurate. The personal journey is imagined, but grounded in recorded testimonies of German POWs who wrestled with guilt, transformation, and the question of how to rebuild both a country and a conscience.